Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making the time to join this, which is the third of the webinars as part of the Supply Chain Skills Development Programme for Watford Borough Council, delivered by Brandywin, who I'm representing today. We've got quite a lot to get through, but let's just kick off with the first couple of things I want to talk about. I've got the slides to move on. So just quickly about me, this will be, for some of you, the third time you've seen this, so we're not going to go into real lots of detail, but I have a strong background in the public sector, and working with CAPS and others on delivering to the government, so I know what the government are like as a customer, but I also now work with Brandywin and as a separate consultant to small companies that are wanting to enter this market. And we are now actually an official partner with Brandywin, which is something that we're exceedingly proud of to deliver this Fit to Bid programme that this is part of into the north of England. Okay, so the agenda between now and we've got quite a lot to get through. So to give you an idea of exactly what we're trying to do here, this is the third one, and the process is that we're trying to make you understand, so you can understand more about the procurement process, getting into the heads of the procurement people in local authorities, what their drivers are, and how to communicate with them, but also to get used to terminology and the process, etc., so you become more familiar. Not that suddenly you'll become an expert, but just that so you're not seeing these things for the first time. Because when you see some of the documentation, it can be incredibly overwhelming. So hopefully by the end of this particular webinar, there are things here you'll be more familiar. At least when you see them, yes, I know something about them. That's the idea. So we are going to go into terminology. We are going to go into showing you some of the live tender documents, something that actually a live example of an invitation to tender, which is what ITT stands for there, that Brandywin actually got involved in. We'll talk about evaluation methodology and what MEET means. We'll get to that later. Tender timelines, which are very important. And then the tender business model, which jobs to be done, we always like, what is it that the local authority are after? What are their big ticket items that they want to deliver? We'll get into what's called ESG, environmental, social governance, and social value. Those two are related. They're kind of two sides of a similar coin, if that isn't too much of a mixed metaphor. We'll also get into bidding via consortium and partnerships, which can be something of a real avenue for or route for smaller companies to get into this market when they're smaller and newer companies. And then some time, hopefully, for a Q&A. What I would say is feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'll respond to the chat as much as quickly as I can in the Q&A, or we will make some time at the end to ask some questions. But if there's something I'm going into that you just want a bit more clarification, put the question on. I'll come back to it. We also have a couple of bits where I'm going to a couple of quick exercises, things for you to think about, where I might ask you to put a few things in the chat. I may stress here that there are no right or wrong answers on anything I say. The idea is to get you thinking a particular way. That's the aim. Okay, and with that, like I say, some of this is going to be technical. I'll try and make it so that the idea is to demystify, so that you are seeing things thinking, right, that makes sense to me. So you don't see a term like ITT, for example, that you might not have seen before. You don't understand what it is. Hopefully, this webinar will make things a lot clearer for you. So you'll have seen this before on the other webinars. This is the Fit to Bid process. So it starts with engaging the procurement. So the opportunities there to actually talk to and build relationships with the procurement departments in local authorities. Any opportunity, there are events they run, both virtual and face-to-face. We also have the online bid capability assessment, which I'm hoping most of you have filled in. If you haven't, I push you to do that. Because what it does is when you have the one-to-ones, it helps us understand more, and the one-to-ones are really designed to give you a really clear path and a route to your success for your particular company. Because obviously a lot of what we're talking about here is general, but the one-to-ones will be specific for you. Bidding skills, which is what we're going to talk about. We talked about previously, and I'm going to give some more information on today. Sales enablement. I think really what the point is there is you are always selling. When you are talking to the procurement, when you're either talking to them directly or you're completing your bid response, you're selling, but it's a very particular kind of selling. You're selling the benefits that fixes a problem or solves a problem for that local authority. What's their problem? What can you do to fix that? Why are you the right company? That kind of sale. Um, and that goes on with the actual tender advice. The tender advice is how to do that. We've already gone through something about the language, empathy, understanding, research, and this now is getting into the meat of the documentation that actually you would need to complete in order to take you to the next stage. And then the final part of it is the meet the buyer events, which I don't know the calendar on this, but I know there's some coming up. That's an opportunity to be in the room with some what's known as tier one, tier two buyers, which are large private companies, but also the procurement department from Watford Council to actually help build these relationships. Okay, so let's do some differentiators. So if you've not dealt with the public sector before, it's likely, obviously, you've dealt with the private sector. Private sector meaning any commercial business that you are providing a service for or a product. So some comparisons. So budgets and funding. Now these are general, but they do show the difference. So budgets in the public sector are allocated annually, and that interestingly, at this time of year in March, they will be running round to complete work to use all their budgets. But most things are allocated annually. There might be a rare piece of ad hoc work, but generally speaking, they know what they are able to spend for that year. Whereas in the private sector, they may well have budgets, but also they'll work to business requirements. There might be more flexibility. And I think the point there is that for a local authority, their spending isn't flexible. Regulations, yeah, so highly regulated in the public sector in a whole series of different ways, and some of those regulations will affect you, some won't. There may well be particular expectations they have. There might be, for example, they'd expect you to have ISO 9001 exactly as an example. It's quite a common one. But they absolutely work under this legislation and these directives, and again, it's inflexible. Whereas in the private sector, depending upon the sector, it can be low restrictions. Obviously some areas are highly regulated in the private sector as well. So the process, and this is really what we're going to get into in this webinar. The process is very specified in responding to a public sector bid. It's a very specific process laid out, but that's the point. It's a process. Once you understand it, it is predictable. Once you get good at this, you can do it time and time again. Process in the private sector will be, generally speaking, with more simple proposal submission, more like, if you like, a quote with some details, and more flexible. It might not be that they ask you for less information, but there's probably more flexibility in how you provide it. Time periods, again, really important. On any tender, there is a clear timeline. Very, very clear timeline. You will be on the tender documentation. It will say when it was published, when the date for example, and we'll get into this in more detail. I'll show you an example of, say, site visits, and absolutely there will be the date for when the tender response has to be in, and it will say something like midday, normally on a Friday of a particular month, and on that date at that time is exactly what they mean. They don't mean 1 minute past. They don't mean 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They mean that date and that time. And our guidance, and you probably heard me say this before, is actually to aim for the day before, because that's much safer than leave it to the last minute. But there is no flexibility. Well, of course, in the private sector, it doesn't operate like that. Generally speaking, they will have more flexible purchase. In the public sector, transparency, in the public sector, they are completely transparent, as long as they're not getting involved in areas that might be of danger to the public. And so I can't think of the right phrase, but so, particular secrets, but that unlikely to be involved in those areas. There is real clarity. The process has to be transparent, to see who's been awarded, what they've been awarded for, etc. Whereas in the private sector, they don't have to be quite so open. Generally speaking, if they're not a PLC, and they'll work with competitive pressures, so they actually won't they won't show information that might be advantageous to their competitors, whereas the local authority don't see another local authority as a competitor, as you'll understand. Primary motivation. So I think I mentioned on the last webinar that we did, remember that they're spending our money, and say they being a local authority, they're spending our money. So they're there to spend money wisely. And um, so it isn't a race to the bottom with the price. We'll get into that in more detail about pricing. But they have to spend money wisely and they have to be transparent with that, with the thing we said before. Whereas the prime motivation for a private business is return on investment. They do want to spend money wisely, but they're really interested in what the shareholder value is. So in the public sector, again, stakeholders can be many. It can be quite complex. Your initial stakeholder may well be the procurement department, but they're not the practitioners. They're not the people actually going to be utilising the service you offer, and it can be quite complex, the stakeholder landscape. Whereas in the private sector, generally speaking, there'll be fewer and more identifiable. There might just be one or two people that you have to deal with. And finally, the focus is on reducing spend and saving versus increased profit margins for and shareholder value for a private company versus the local authority. Now, that might sound very negative on one side, but it's not. It's just designed to you understand what their drivers are. They're spending our money. They have to do it wisely. They have to be transparent. They have to do it legally and fairly. And the way that they do that is they follow a specific process and a specific timeline. So these are the reasons why they do these things. And those symbols at the bottom there are just to show things becoming increasingly important to support this is diversity, a circular economy, keeping wealth in the community, making sure that you're comes on well-being and keeping wealth in the community, as I said before. So, these things become increasingly apparent. And as we go through and we talk about other areas like ESG and social value, see how these can help influence your tender response. So these bullets here are genuine feedback we've got from companies that we've worked with over a period of time, saying that these are the key issues or their concerns. And these are all reasonable and perfectly understandable. Insufficient experience in the public sector. And that's fair enough. We're here to try and help you and support you, and to guide you and to give you. My phrase has been: you have a seat at the table. So the social, I was going to say, SMEs are really important to the local economy for local authorities, and they really do want to work with companies in the local area. Your inexperience is not a barrier as long as you can solve a problem for them and you can do it well and you can demonstrate that. So the second one, the industry is dominated by big companies that lock you out. This is something of a fallacy. I understand why people believe it. From my own background in the corporate world, you got to understand that these large companies, they have an entire department that do nothing but respond to tenders day in and day out. And if you look at it from the high level numbers game, if you're doing this a lot, then you're going to win some. And that's an oversimplification. But coming back to a comment I made before about the fact that there is a directive now on local authorities to keep wealth in the community, and also there are targets around a third of all procurement spend to be with SMEs. There is a lot of pressure on them to work with small companies, positive pressure, you understand. But the belief that somehow the larger companies have a lockout is not true. There are some stories I can tell you from the bad old days where things used to be slightly more like that, but not the transparency that we mentioned before on the previous slide is actually what stops this from happening. There are some very big infrastructure projects of which only large companies are able, just because of their resource capabilities, but we're not really looking at those things in the work that we're looking at here. So it is a fallacy. The business is largely unknown to public sector buyers. So here's an opportunity. Really, what we're saying here is, well, nobody knows about me in that sphere. So make yourself known. You can contact procurement departments. You can look for if they have themselves any meet the buyer events. Obviously, you can be invited to meet the buyer events through the Fit to Bid program. However, do some research. Look on their websites. The webinars before we've talked about researching. Go onto the Watford website. You will see what work they've coming up, what's in the pipeline. But reach out to the procurement department. Tell them what you do, and ask them what they've got coming up. Build a relationship. If they do have face-to-face events, then go. And then all of a sudden, you're not unknown to public sector buyers. And that also goes when you can't reach the right people. Research. The right people are on, their names are on there, their email addresses are on there. Often there's even their phone numbers, but certainly there'll be their email addresses. Reach out. Um, there are some practical criteria in a tender that stop you being considered. That might be there are certain ones where you have to have a certain turnover or you have to be a company of a certain size. There are ways around that via partnerships, etc., which we'll get into later on, but there are strategies to stop that being an issue. Um, Lack of a proactive marketing strategy really goes with about being unknown, contacting, reaching out. That's marketing. So it's just about having some plan to get yourself in front of these people. Dated or no client reviews, testimonials. Well, this is something that is key. Testimonials, case and reviews from your clients are the strongest evidence, combined with case studies, the strongest evidence that you can do what you say you can do, that you deliver a product of or a service of quality. And here is my evidence that shows. And it is important that it's up to date. It really needs to be in the last year. They might sometimes ask for the last 6 months, might be very specific. But what you need to do, and you need to do this for your business anyway, you should be asking for reviews and testimonials. You should be reaching out to your clients and asking for them and keeping that on in anyway, regardless of whether you go for public sector tenders. You really should be doing that. It's a really easy thing to do. Good customers are really happy to give you reviews and testimonials as to why they work with you, how long they've been working with you, and they look forward to working with you in the future and what you've done to help them. This is really important. Um, Time constraints, and able to devote time to plan proper submissions. Yes, I get that. You're running your business. So you need to look at how you could work this out. It is something that gets better with practice. So you need to look how you could devote the time as to, and that's why is this particular tender, is it worthwhile? You can't magic time up, but can you use your time better? Can you get some support? Can you get somebody to do some remote work for you? There are people around that will help you with this. There are virtual assistants who can take other admin tasks off you so you could do some work yourself. It's basically, you need to look at the time that you can make. Limited knowledge about the tendering process and how to write strong bids. Well, as this is your third webinar, you'll now be armed with more information than when you started. Post your one-to-ones, you'll actually have even more information. So you are in the process, all you people that have joined these sessions, of making sure that you understand what it takes, what elements it takes to make your bid stronger and more relevant. And we'll talk about relevance a bit more later on. And which goes in the last one, no idea what to put in the response to make it a winning one. So my advice here, and we mentioned this in the last one, the most important thing on your tender response is to answer the question. They ask a question, answer it in full. But the kind of secret sauce, and it says here in the session, we'll talk you through some of the biggest secrets. It's not really a secret. It's just that things that are unknown if you don't know this area. And it's that if you don't know it, then it just feels like one big secret. It's not really. Is making sure that your answers are relevant, that when you talk about something you do, how does that solve a problem? And at the same time, if you can phrase it in such a way that also hits goals that they've got and imperatives they've got, then that's when you get to your submission going from being good and accurate to excellent. So we'll get more into that as we go along. But I can tell you now, you're more armed, you're better armed now than you were before you joined any of these webinars, because the terminology and we talked about before about empathy, understanding getting in the head of the buyer, all these things really matter. So now then, I'm going to try and make this so it isn't too dry and too boring, but it is really, really important. When you find a tender and you see this is something that we might be interested in, you download some documentation. In there, there'll be something called PQQ, which is pre-qualification questionnaire. It's sometimes called a supplier questionnaire. This is a document that actually really, if you're done properly, you only need to complete once, and then you can reuse it on every other tender. And this is about your company, the makeup of your company, who has financial control. And there might be some questions you can complete specific to this. Have you done work in this area before? But it also, it makes it really clear that you are a legal and fit company as far as your legal standing. Are you limited? Are you a partnership? All those kind of things. Nothing really particularly worried about. It only gets complicated if you have lots of subsidiaries, because there are lots of options to put in there and you have a really complex supply chain. But for the most part, it's quite straightforward. The ITT which is the information to tender, is the core part. This is where the information is about the actual tender, what the requirements are, and what's expected for the tender response, and all the details on what the scoring is supposed to be, etc. So the ITT is the core document. But there are some others. So there can be an RFP, a request for proposal. This is something which I would describe as something of a fishing exercise. An RFP can be from a large department, or it can be from something small, where they're not quite sure when or exactly what the tender might look like. So they give some general information, and they ask some general questions, and they allow you to send a proposal of how you would meet that. It might include pricing, it might not. But that then at some point may or may not turn into an ITT. And sometimes they'll say, we're going to do this, but next year, for example, we're going to put this out to tender full. But then when they do it, they're armed with more information about the market and what potential products are there out there. A slightly more lower key version of the same thing is an RFQ, request for quotation, which tends to be for smaller projects. And really doesn't require a lot of detailed response. This is something really quite simple. It's something we're looking at. It's one particular project they might have that we might go ahead with, and we're looking for just essentially a quotation, and it will not be as anything like as detailed as the previous ones. Then a framework agreement. So framework agreements and DPSs are related. A framework agreement and a DPS is where a group of companies, once you can apply to join a framework or a DPS, that then once you get on it, you're a part of a group of companies that are there to potentially deliver on a particular project. And I'm going to use a really example I've made up here, but say they were building a new hospital. Then there would be a framework agreement for that, and everything that they need in order, all the trades and services they need would be on that. They allow companies to apply to join that framework agreement, and once you've gone through that, you're effectively pre-qualified, and then they can look to draw down on different companies to get them to give more details on pricing, etc. But it means you don't have to go through the rest of it. It's easier. It's designed to be easier for the local authorities, not designed to be easy for you. So it's a lot of work, and you might not know what that's worth. Some of these framework agreements are 10 years long. Some you can join at any point. Sometimes you can only join at particular points, but they are valuable and they are worth the effort if it's in your area. Dynamic purchasing system is a similar thing where it's a group of companies. It is entirely electronic. Is a dynamic purchase system. It's completely online, and generally you can join this at any time. And again, they can be anything 3-5 years long. So the invitation to tender, the core document. So we need to look at what the different elements of that document are, because when you first see it, it can be a little overwhelming. So these are the most likely sections. They can differ, but for the most part, they're going to cover all these. So the introduction will be background on the tender, what the purpose of the tender is, what they're trying to achieve. And we'll should make it really, really clear if it's broken down into different lots. Those lots could be by profession or by function, or it could be geographic sometimes. But that breaks down how this is going to work, what they're after, and what kind of companies that they're looking for to provide that service or that product, whatever it is. Then the tender conditions, the legal parameters surrounding the tender. If there are specific requirements of a provider that they have to have certain accreditations, that would be made really, really clear there. So in simple terms, if you had to have, for example, ISO 9001, it would be made very, very clear that you had to have that. And if you didn't have that, what you can do, you can put is, are you planning to, or you're working towards that? You're allowed to have something, so you're working towards it, you'll have it by the time the tender is delivered, for example. But if it's a specific requirement, you can't ignore it. And there are other ones that you might be expected to be part of particular bodies or organizations or accreditations or certifications, but it'd be made really, really clear. So the specification takes the introduction into more detail. Description of the supply, the service or works be provided in really normally in quite specific detail. And so again, you can look at that and say, well, can I do that? Or can I do part of it, which is something we'll get to later about whether you can do part of it, maybe you can't do it all. And then instructions of the tender submission. This is really key. This is information, as I mentioned earlier on, that you should be taking to heart absolutely and make a note of. You should know when the submission date is. You should know when the dates are and what the instructions are for if you can do site visits. Because for some service, some tenders, let's say it's a cleaning uh, tender, you will want, if you can, to visit the site, be able to give a good price on whether you can do this. You want to visit it, so you understand how that works. But the most important thing is when you have to submit the bid, as I mentioned earlier. But other things are the date that the contract would start, the length of the contract. So as an example, we're just going to pick a number out of thin air, and we say if it's £100,000 and it's 2 years, then that'll be £100,000 for the 2 years. So it will be £50,000 per year over those 2 years. Just make that really. So those things are made really, really clear, so you understand what you're actually submitting on. So then quality of tender response. Now they might not call it this, they might just call this quality, they might change the wording of it. But these are how they look at, I think I mentioned before, and anybody that knows me is probably bored of me using this phrase, but it is a fact that on public sector bids, you're as a client, they are very, very interested in how you do something, not just that you do it. And they want to see that you deliver quality, and they will talk about how that quality is to be measured. They'll talk about how you're going to evidence that quality in your tender response. They will be made really, really clear generally what they want to see. So I'll ask very, very clear questions which you must answer in full. Excuse me a second. My apologies, didn't want to sneeze down the microphone. So yeah, it will be made really, really clear what those quality measures are, and they'll expect you to demonstrate how you would deliver those and how you've done it in the past. Pricing and delivery schedule. Pricing can be sometimes very straightforward, can be quite complex, but it made very, very clear how they want to understand your pricing. They might give you some guidance. They might not. It just depends on the way that it's done. But it will be made very, very clear what your parameters are. Unfortunately, sometimes you don't have a price. You don't have a value on the tender, but most times you do. Don't see that as a target. It's guidance, and really is giving you a maximum. So generally, you'd be looked at as a maximum. Don't go over it because there's really little or no point. You're trying to meet that or come under generally. Then form of tender. So that's a declaration. It's important that it means that you are going to stick to the terms of the tender. And that goes with the certificate of non-collusion to say that you have not colluded any other bidder on the tender. So you're not trying to set up any kind of cartel. Then you might have a draft of proposed contract to be signed by the successful bidder. But that's actually more likely now that would be supplied later once you've been successful. So those are the different areas. And like I said, it's in one document, or sometimes they split it into several different ones. It can be overwhelming, but all you do is you work through each one individually to make sure that you've answered every question, you supplied the information that's required. So some things that might seem a bit scary when you look at this, and we're putting these on for a reason. And you'll see this on everything. Grounds for mandatory exclusion. So basically, this will ask you questions. And this might be in the supply questionnaire. It might find its way into another area of the documents. But these are asking questions about disqualification of directors, fraud, money laundering, modern slavery, some really tough questions. Essentially, if you answer yes to any of those questions, or feel you should answer yes to those questions, then you are automatically excluded. And it's important this because you understand that this, they have to be completely transparent, as you mentioned earlier, and therefore these elements are really important. But it does look really scary when you read them. Grounds for discretionary exclusion might be something, and a simple example, maybe a director of a limited company. One of them has a CCJ, which has been paid, but it's still on their credit file. And but you declare it, or somebody declares it, and it may well be that it's up to them. So, well, actually, that's not important for us, or they might ask you for more information. The point here is to be transparent, because they have to be transparent with them, because much better to bring something up and go, that's not an issue, than not say something and actually that be excluded when you could have dealt with it earlier. Because if they discover something that you haven't declared, there is a high possibility they'll just exclude at that point. Then this is something that makes a lot of people. I actually had a recent conversation with a company. Said, do we always expect to be asked questions about financial questions? And the answer is yes. Because we keep coming back to this transparency and accountability, they want to ensure that they're working with companies that are fit and are stable, are still going to be around. If they say the contract's 3 years, they want to believe they're still going to be around in 3 years' time. So they are going to ask some quite searching financial information. And sometimes it's something as simple as this: what the turnover last year for year ending, confirm your bankers. They may run a credit check, and generally speaking, that'll be on larger organizations. But it depends upon the makeup and what actually that tender involves. Other times you actually get a spreadsheet and it'd be quite involved, and it's something you might be asking your accountant or your internal bookkeeper maybe to actually complete, because it's slightly more complex. It's just one of the things. They're going to ask the information. If they ask it, you have to provide it. But they're not trying to trip you up. They're just trying to show that they're selecting the right companies, that they've asked the right questions, and they're being transparent. Also, on just about everyone, they'll ask about insurance, employer's liability, public liability, professional indemnity. They will say the coverage level they expect, and you can say if you already hold that. And then you can say you are willing to obtain if successful. So, for example, my own business, we have employer's liability of 5 million. If we had to take it up to 10, then we would, and it wouldn't be a negative that we don't have 10 now. The positive would be that we're willing to obtain it. Should we be successful, then we'll upgrade it to 10 million. Really quite straightforward. Then they might ask you some other other questions about suitability. Are you aware of any material reason why you wouldn't be able to reasonably complete performance? And if you think you have financial reasons why you find it difficult, your limited expertise or capacity, then you give yes to those questions. You might have the chance to say yes, but give some details. Obviously, if you really think you're struggling, it might not, at this point, might decide actually this isn't the tender for you. Or it might be a case of, look, given what I understand, I won't be able to do this, and then see if there's an opportunity to explain your reasons why you think you might have a material reason. And then the last one thing, do your organization confirm you will comply with the requirements of the council's best practice and legal obligations? Of course, you're going to say yes to that. To say no to that would be kind of pointless, basically. But they're just double checking that you understand what it is that what they have to adhere to, and therefore all their supply chain needs to adhere to. So into the method statement, as we call it, with the ITT requirements, a bit more on what's actually going to happen. They will talk about different areas like service delivery, mobilization plan, and a management structure information are common things for them to ask. And as you see there's a weighting, and we'll all be aware what weighting is, but just to explain it, it means obviously which questions need more detail, or what emphasis is given to that answer. So service delivery on this particular one is a weighting of 25%. And this is actually from we're now getting into an area where this is details from a tender that Brandon actually responded to deliver business support services, just like what you're part of now. So in the service delivery, there was how do you propose to deliver the works in question against the requirements? And what's interesting at the end of it says, how would you mitigate against any risks or challenges? An example there would be if we had a resource. How do we deliver, say, for example, these webinars? What happens if somebody is ill? Then we have backup. We have a wider team. What happens if you did this, for example, you were doing it expecting to do it face to face? What happened? Then you would change it to Zoom, etc. Things, all these things kind of came out in COVID, etc. So you explain what the challenges might be and how you would mitigate against them. And that's obviously a simple example for us, but it's something that you need to meet head on. And you need to say, right, if this happened, this is what we would do. You can't list every possible risk, but obvious ones. How would you deliver how do you see the challenges and how would you work around them? Mobilization plan. Just basically, how do you deliver the tasks? Plan to include the tasks to be undertaken. How does just the detail? How do you get started? We're talking mobilization. How would you start? How do you get this going to undertake whatever the service or product requirement is? Manage instruction information. This is actually quite important. And it needs to be done well. So they will ask what the management structure in the company is, and they'll want to know where the accountabilities are, who does what. They may well ask for CVs, and my directive really on CVs is they're not interested in what your qualifications are. By that I mean necessary O levels, A levels, degree even. What they're looking for really is experience that's relevant to this tender. So what information in your experience can you put about your experience or your staff's experience, your colleagues' experience that is relevant to this tender? Because they've got a lot of information to go through. So make sure that everything you give them is gold. So sometimes we call them pen portraits rather than CVs. So to take the person and talk about who they are, what their position is, where they sit in the management structure, and their experience that is relevant to this tender. If the experience isn't relevant, then you could consider removing that. But it's really important that the local authority understands how your company is set up. Even if you're a really small one, they just want to understand how it works. Your experience, again, this is relevant. It's about making your relevant experience to your organization. So for us, it was always as a delivery, a business support service. So what have we done? And what have we done similarly related training we worked with a diverse number of organizations, what the contract value was, what the details of the social value, so we could evidence it. Say, look, this is what we've done, this is who we delivered to, this is kind of what we've done, this is the evidence, and this is the feedback that we got, and you know, to actually bring our experience to life. And this is what with things like this is an opportunity to bring what you do to life. Excuse me. This you can also reference, you know, your testimonials, etc., in your case studies. Business engagement. So just, you know, for this particular one, again, this was live from the tender we responded to. Please provide a description of your experience in engaging and working with a wide range of SMEs. What they wanted to do is they wanted to have a wide range of companies involved. And therefore, how are we going to do that? What avenues are we going to take to engage with as many businesses as possible? So, for example, it's working with the local chambers of commerce, it's working with other forums, it's getting involved in any areas where we could reach out to businesses to share this particular program. And how were we going to do that? So we had to give them a plan of how we were going to do that. So we would meet a particular target that they set of so many companies to be involved. Excuse me. And so how would we do that? So that was 10% of the weighting. So it was important. It wasn't the most important, but it was important. And then equality, brief examples how your companies engaged with Black and minority ethnic and small companies, and excluded communities to successfully deliver service under similar contexts. So what have we done in that space proactively previously to deliver that? If we hadn't, then what you do is you turn it into this is what you would do. And you know, if it's limited, then in that particular, so but our plan is to, and this is our plan to deliver this, which you could have mentioned earlier. So these are the kind of questions that they're going to ask. But this is all these are an ability to showcase your company, to do more than just answer the question, but actually word it in such a way that, look, we're really good. This is what we're doing. This is the plans. We have the policies in place, and this is what we've done previously. This is how we can evidence that. And then for when this is appropriate, you know, do you play London living wage, etc. Obviously, this is only appropriate for those tenders in London South East. And you know, what do you do? Do you presently pay them? Do you, etc., etc. So it's for those first two is information only. And for the third one, there was a weighting on the answer, which is quite interesting. They asked two questions where there was no weighting. They just were curious, but actually the answer one way or the other didn't actually have any effect on the scoring of the tender. But the last one did. And please set out how this will bring added value to the service in question. They wanted to know why that would be a good thing. Well, of course, if you're paying the staff a London living wage, then as a minimum, then obviously that was a strong incentive rather than just paying the minimum. So So then you would sign a declaration. And once you sign the declaration, you are bound by what you've said. So if you say you deliver a service, you have delivered a service and you provided references, etc., then they expect now that you have now said you can do. Once you sign that, then that is binding, and they'll expect that you will deliver that, and you have delivered that, and they will check up and they will follow your references up. So be clear that the information provided is accurate. So meet most economically advantageous tender, which is we mentioned earlier. So this is the combination between price and quality, essentially, at its most simple. And so we put two examples here, quite extreme examples. So 75% on price, 25% on quality. A focus obviously clearly is on low price. And you might find that in, we'll just use a cleaning contract as a good example. Look, they have a job to do. They do want quality, but they also realize that what they're after is a price that's going to work for them. So they have work to do, and so it's for potentially for the tenderer to work out how many staff they would need to do the same work in the hours that they've got, and can they do it, and can they do that at a price that's equitable to the local authority, obviously staying within wage bands, etc., and legal structure on what people can be paid. And then and this is actually the basis of the business support tender that we talked about earlier, where it was 25% about price. The price is still important, but actually what they were really after was quality. So you actually had to show in the tender response that it was of very, very high quality. So there is some moves to change this from meet to mat and remove economically, because it actually, you could argue, it's a barrier to things being done well, because what's recognized now is price alone, a short-term gain on price might not deliver long-term value. So there is some push to go for a most advantageous tender rather than a most economically advantageous tender, but they're still using this phrase for now. So I'm not reading them all out. In the assessment criteria, there, quality, price, and technicability, all these things really matter. Your social value, environmental benefits, basically everything you put in this is how you're going to be assessed. The questions normally will be really, really clear about what they're expecting, so there shouldn't be any surprises, but you just need to answer them in full. So, and then typically, and I think we actually touched on this in the previous webinar about the scoring. So the tender assessment is scored from 0 to 5, generally speaking. I've only ever once seen it scored differently than this. Obviously, you're after a 5. The real trap is in 3, in my opinion. So if you're going to get a 0, you're really not responding properly. 1, you're not even trying. 2, again, you're just not responding properly. But the real trap here, in my opinion, from evaluating lots of tender responses over the years, is in 3, where it's nearly right, it's nearly there, it's acceptable. It misses maybe some bits, but it's okay. Well, okay won't do. So if you're going to put the work into this, then you put in proper work and you make sure that you answer everything fully, that you are showcasing your company in the best possible. You're using really clear, really good, positive language, that there's no ambiguity, that if there's an area where you show some weakness, look at it again, look at how you're answering and how you could shore that up. A majority of tender responses fit in that to actually, and I'm including some very large companies that I've worked with. The tender responses tend to be somewhere 3 to 4 on a good day, but a lot of them in 3, which is surprising. So a 4 meets the standard required, comprehensive response in terms of detail, relevant to questions. So really, really good. And for that particular, it might be enough. But what you really want to do is to exceed the required standards. It says that what you want to do is be able to answer questions in such a way that it's not just that you're going to deliver. If you want to exceed this required standard, then this is where research and client is concerned, is showing that you understand, you really want to do this, that your enthusiasm for doing this comes across on every page and answer to every question, that you can say, well, we do this, which we know is in line with the strategy for XYZ Council over the next 3 years. Something like that shows that you understand what the local authority is trying to, what the bigger deal is over the next few years. And that's how those answers to questions go way beyond just answer, oh, we can do this. It's a case of we can do this, and we can do this in such a way that we understand that will deliver what your bigger picture is. And also that it looks at improvement, innovation, and value, continuous improvement. You show that throughout the length of the contract. So if it's 3 years, you don't want to deliver the same thing for 3 years. What you're aiming to do over those 3 years to be even better and deliver more efficiency and improvement all across the length of the contract is where you get to a score of 5 rather than a score of 4. I'm very conscious of time. So a tender timetable we mentioned earlier before. So we said here that this will be on the tender documents on the ITT, and the one they put the 22nd July 2022 submission deadline, incredibly important. It's more important if that what you really should be aiming for is the 21st of July, just to really hammer that home. The rest of it, you just need the things to put it on chart, put it on the calendar, put it on Outlook, make sure you understand, plan in advance. And just before we take just a step back slightly, just to reiterate things, I suppose overall these webinars, this is what we've tried to get across. Focus on what the buyer wants, not what you want to sell. And you need to understand the market, you need to understand what it is they're after. It may well come across in the ITT document. If it doesn't, go onto the website and look at what their values are. They'll have a value statement. Look at what it is that they want to achieve over the next few years and see how you can influence that. And look for different areas of opportunity. Look for the outcomes that they're after. You can then frame that you can deliver, you can help them with, and formulate a plan for how you're going to respond to that tender. What can you offer? Because that's where that, if you like, is a secret sauce. The combination of those 5 things there, and as you get the slides shared with you, you'll be able to go look at this in more detail to submit a winning bid. Means that you really understand what it is they're after, not just that you can do XYZ service. So the reason for doing this is twofold. One is because it's the right thing to do, but also you've got to do what your competitors wouldn't. So if you're in a highly competitive market and where the differentiators are difficult to define, then the way you get this across is how you can differentiate yourself to show how excellent you are and how you understand what it is that they're after. So just quickly, and I think with the time, I don't think we'll actually ask you to put something in the chat unless you can do something very quickly. It's something to put in your head, really. What is the customer trying to get done that will lead to the outcomes they seek? What are they trying to achieve? What problems they're trying to solve? What needs are they trying to satisfy? And what are their big outcomes? Although it's like I say, it does exercise, and I'd normally expect you to, I'd wait and put some time to answer. It's more about, I want you to think about that. So you don't have to put something in the chat right now, but it is something, when you get these slides, it's an exercise I think that is worth doing. And feel free to put something in chat by all means, but it is quite a big, it's quite something to really, really think about. To understand what it is that a local authority needs, what problems they're trying to solve, and what are their big outcomes. So I'm going to give you an example. An outcome might be that their big outcomes that they want to improve their diversity of the people that they work within the council, and it might be that the job to do is to work on their recruitment processes. So there's an example of something they need to do. So but getting in the head, as we mentioned this, to really hammer this home, getting into the head of the local authority and understanding what their outcomes are is the key to your tender response being successful. So we are going to march on. So there's a couple of slides on this, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I never was, even if we have more time. ESG, environmental social governance, is a big deal. It's been around for a good few years. Essentially, to sum this up, if this is on one side of the coin, social values on the other. And to put this in perspective, environmental social governance is about limiting the impact, the negative impact of your business. So it is about making sure that things are done properly, especially from an environmental point of view, but other areas as well, that you're sustainable, that you're limiting your carbon footprint, etc., etc. What you can consider. Now, this all looks, especially with the word governance, in small companies, it's normally a word that makes people kind of wince, and I get that. But basically, so what you need to consider, what can you do within your business that meets ESG guidelines? It is something I suggest that is worth looking. We could have spent an hour just on this, believe me, it's such a huge subject, but it will come up. What can you do, for example, environmental? What can you do to reduce your waste? What can you do, if possible, to reduce your gas emissions? Can you reduce your travel by which would affect your carbon footprint? How do you affect your energy usage? Do you have do you have solar panels, etc.? Things like that. And your supply chain as well. Do you have a supply chain, or do you work with your companies that on your supply chain who also reduce their carbon footprint, reduce their carbon, their greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc. Social ones, paying fair and living wages, making sure there's equal opportunities, that there's employee benefits, workplace health and safety in place, etc., etc. And Governance really is just about how you control that. So it can be simple as having a policy around, just having a policy. You have an environmental policy, you have a social policy. This is what we do. We try and be an ethical business, and this is how we measure to say to ensure that we are ethical. It is a huge subject, is ESG. But for a tender response, it will normally be guided as to for ESG. If there is an ESG requirement, they'll make it quite clear. We want you to demonstrate that you have environmental policy in place, for example, and they'll make that really clear so you respond in that way. So the key takeaways, you look at your business. A lot of the things, both in this and social value, are things you're probably doing already. That's the point. You probably are. You probably are a more ethical business and a more sustainable business than you realize. So what existing frameworks are useful detail? There are things online. There are plenty of things, and we can also guide you if you reach out. There are tips to make yourself more sustainable. Some of this is really obvious, really, really key stuff. Just because it's wrapped under this ESG banner doesn't mean it's things you're not doing. But if in the tender they make particular response, but they want you to be able to measure this, they'll make it really clear how you're going to do that, how you're going to monitor it and report on it. And you make somebody, ideally, you make somebody in your company, and if it's a one-man company, it's going to be you. But if you've got a small team, somebody's responsibility to take, or somebody's responsibility for taking ESG as part of their role, just to keep it. It's not a full-time role. It's just something to make sure that if you in a tender, if you say that we're going to do this, then they're going to expect you to do it. So if you're reducing this, or you're doing something, you're putting something in place or policy in place, then they'll want to see that you've actually done it. So make it somebody's responsibility. Right, social value. If ESG is about reducing the possibility of negative impact, then delivery social value is more about what you can actually do positively. So it's an enormous subject, but I guarantee a lot of this you're already doing. So social value can include diversity. It can be responsible growth. It can be fostering healthier environments and communities. It can be getting involved in local charities. It can be sponsoring or getting involved in different community projects in your area, or if it's not in your area, in the area where the contract is being delivered. And it can be also include things like guaranteeing your employees to have a day to volunteer, and if that volunteering day can actually be something that is in line with the what the local authority are after, then even better. You make sure you have equal opportunities in place. You try and be innovative, etc. There are so many things here where you can deliver social value. It's not just about planting trees. And I say that because I come from a background of corporates that love to do that. There's so much more that you can do that you are probably doing already. Again, it's a huge subject in itself, but it is a real positive. And my view is that social value is something of a small company's superpower. If the contract is over, I think it's £130,000 now, there will be 10% of the scoring system that will be based upon social value, and it is your opportunity. That 10%, that might be the bit that gets you over the hump to win the contract over another company. So anything that you can show that you can do in your local area that benefits the local community, and this isn't about throwing money at it, because if it was, then it would all be about, then all the large companies would win this. It's very clear in the direction that this is not about throwing money at it. A lot of this you don't need to spend on at all. It's about doing the right thing and demonstrating that you're doing the right thing for the local community. And what I would guide against, and I saw something recently where somebody put, oh, we plan to be net zero by 2050. Don't do something like that. Do something, if it's a 3-year contract, what are you going to deliver over the next 3 years? What are you going to do? Don't make big blanket statements and high level statements. What can you actually do? Um, Again, this is a big subject, but it's worth looking into it. There are resources online, and they're also here in for London small business done by the mayor is a guide to social value for London small business. It is a fantastic document. We don't have something similar where I am in I'm in Preston in Lancashire, and I wish they did. It's a terrific, and it goes into more detail about what you can actually do to make a difference here and do the right thing. It's not simply about doing things just so you can win a tender, although it will help. But it's also about doing the right thing and being involved in your local area. And it becomes increasingly important with your entire supply chain because if you do sub work for another company and they have social value or they have ESG framework, they'll expect you to work within it. So download this document. When you get these slides, you'll see the links there, and it will give you a lot more detail. Okay, so again, really tight for time. I do apologize. I do talk a lot, as you probably noticed. So again, this is an exercise for you to take away. A SWOT analysis, you might not have done a formal one. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but it's actually a valuable thing to do. But in this particular exercise, I would ask that you, when you get the slides, take this, look at a local authority and do a SWOT analysis thinking, so our strengths are, looking at this tender, we meet fully the requirements and can add value to score highly. And what do you meet? What are your weaknesses? We do not fully satisfy certain score requirements and why. What your opportunities are, what your threats are. Have a look at it. This is about being really introspective on your business and looking hard at it. If there are areas where you're weak, how can you make them stronger? Okay. So take that away. We're not doing this. It's normally we say we'd ask you to put some things in the chat, but I am conscious of time, and I really appreciate your patience as we've gone through this hour. But I would suggest you go through this and do this. It's a really valuable thing to try and do. And the last really big thing is for companies where you think, well, I'm too small, I don't meet these requirements, don't meet those requirements, then there is a potential to partner with other companies. From a local authority or government's point of view, they don't really care. And I say care, they're not bothered that if it's more than one company delivering, as long as somebody's a lead provider and manages it and delivers the contract. It doesn't matter if it's two or three companies that actually deliver it, as long as somebody's in charge and it's managed properly. So there are some considerations around how it's financed and governance decision making. And I think the thing I'd really pick out here is that if you did choose to work with another company, then the bid writing has to be a consistent document, not written by two different companies or appear disjointed. It won't make much sense. So somebody has to oversee the writing of the tender response that details how this is going to work, and it needs to be one voice. And so this is something where you can look at, depending on how, so there's part of a tender that you could actually deliver part of. So you might get another company to bring in with you, or you can deliver it, but you're not quite at the level you need to be very financially or resource. You can potentially work with another company to deliver that and work out how that's going to work. Now, from a finance and management decision-making point of view, you have to think about all those elements. But this is a very, very successful way for small companies to get involved in larger tenders. So just quickly, so there's research you can do on Find a Tender to see what companies have delivered those kind of work and work with that authority. You can start building relationships with local council. As said, you can tailor your USPs to authority. Look at why, so you understand that you have a specialty that they need. You price your bids competitively. This is important. I've always said that it might be the case that your profit margin might be potentially slightly reduced working with a local authority. That might be the case. But the fact is, if you win a 3-year contract, you're going to get paid for 3 years. And that's an amazing position in. And it's something where failing something ridiculous happening where you really mess up, which I don't think any of you are going to do, that underpins your business and it's dependable growth, predictable growth. So nobody's saying you should do it for something where you don't make a profit. Nobody's suggesting that, but your pricing competitively really makes a difference. And you can look for larger partners, work with previous suppliers. The opportunities are there. What generally helps here is working with a procurement department and reaching out there. And when you go to your one-to-ones, they'll talk about reaching out to procurement departments. And then, of course, you've got the Meet the Buyer events, which are a fantastic way to get in front of these people to bring a lot of what I've discussed here and is that I've crammed into this hour will come to life, hopefully. And really here, this just guarantees shows about your journey. I'm going to do it in reverse. Can we do it? Can we win it? We've talked about social value. We've talked about the fact you're keeping community wealth. Um, you're proactively looking for tenders. You're looking for work. You're starting small but thinking big. You're looking for subcontract opportunities. You're focusing your efforts where it matters, and you start with a specific sector. Define your value position and refine it. All these things. It's basically everything you do on a daily bet to grow your business, but just putting it, refining it in a particular way and looking at it a particular way to make sure that the local authority understands the value of what you're offering and how you can help them. So I'm not going to go through all these. Actually this sums up all the areas really that we've talked about over the 3 webinars. That you need to evidence everything that you say you can do. You need to make sure that you've hit every mark on the evaluation, that your proposal is very well written. That why you over somebody else? How can you differentiate yourself? Social value is one of those things. Relevance with the tender and how you've researched the local authority. All those things make a difference. Make sure you're compliant. So these are key considerations. They're natural considerations, and the way the tender documents are designed, they do help you answer these very clearly. So, wow, I know we're a little bit over, so I appreciate you staying with us. All the webinars are available on the Brandwin YouTube channel. You will be also supplied with the slides post this event. I don't actually have the timetable for the one-to-ones and the Meet the Buyer events, but I'm sure that they'll be in touch with you soon to let you know whether they haven't done that already. I know it's a lot of information. The 3 have been a bit of a whirlwind. What I'm hoping, the very minimum that I'm hoping we get out of this is that there are elements of the process and there's terminology and there's a kind of way of thinking which you have now that you possibly didn't have when you first started this. So when you see phrases like ITT, when people start talking about social value, that you're not completely clueless, right? Actually, no, I know a bit about that. Nobody's expecting to be an expert yet, but the idea is that these phrases and this way of working is something now is slightly more demystified than it was. What I would suggest is reach out to Brandwin for more support and advice. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all over these 3 webinars, and hopefully we'll get to meet again at some point in the future. So with that, unless there are any questions, we're just going to skip that. The top 3 action plan there. That's part of you should have already had that shared with you. That's part of your one-to-one. And I will ask now for those here just quickly, if there are any quick questions, I will stick around for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, thank you very much for your patience, and I wish you well with all your tendering in the future.